Hello, everyone. This is Ryan Horner with your favorite chapter, Chapter 11, creating developmentally appropriate classrooms. Now, let's start it off. The rationale for developmentally appropriate educational practice is a couple of things. For one, everyone develops at their own age, and people need to be around their own peers. And this kind of is what, you see with middle school, junior high schools, and kindergarten. You want to get people at certain ages and into different segments where, school's this thing where you separate it by ages and you kind of contain the ages you can be exposed to and the people, where it's a shorter range. And this really comes down to these phases of development. We're not like a linear people. We don't just linearly change. There's phases, and we want to contain these phases and we want to keep these in these phases. And this basically led to the idea of developmentally appropriate practice, or DAP, not the weird handshake thing. And basically the rationale is that people change and people have these ages, and that we need to basically educate around them in order to best accommodate people. So on to DAP. There's three main things that the book talks about, which is one, what is known, and basically these are, what it's all about. What is known about child development and learning, or knowledge of age-related human characteristics. This is to permit general predictions within an age range about what activities, materials, interactions, or experiences will be safe, healthy, interesting, achievable, and also challenging to children. Two, what is known about the strengths, interests, and needs of each individual child in that group. To be able to adapt for and be responsible to inevitable individual variation. And finally, knowledge of the social and cultural context in which children live, to ensure that learning experiences are meaningful, relevant, and respectful for the participating children and their families. So, characteristics of a developmentally appropriate classroom. This is where we're getting into the meat potatoes of the whole big concept. Basically, there was an old way of thinking and a new way of thinking. The old way of thinking was you had uniform classroom behavior. You wanted everyone to basically be in line and to be the same, and you promoted a sense of, everyone's being the same. Everyone has an idea that, it's this one size fits all, and you need to conform to that one size, because if you're not doing that size, you're not doing it right. And each kid, they would assign them individual tasks, and they would try to make them do those individual objectives, goals, and projects by themselves, and it was about how well you could do them by yourself. Everything was controlled, and it was mainly based on extrinsic motivation. And in case you don't know what that means, it basically means you're motivated by, at least in this case, what the teacher set up as rewards. And the idea is that you're doing something because the teacher will give you a reward if you do it, not because it's actually for you. And what we saw was, the problem was this doesn't work for everyone. There's no, we're humans. We're not all the same. We are still humans, though, hopefully. So while we have that, there's all these other things we have differently, and especially with age, and how we should be treated at different ages, because throughout our time, we change. So the new way of thinking was intrinsic motivation first. The thing is that you have to be doing things for yourself, because ultimately, that's what teaching is all about. And basically, if you can have the intrinsic motivation, you're going to be able to basically root that into people, where that motivation will continue throughout as, their aging process. Whereas if it's just intrinsic, once they get older, it's all going to fall apart. Secondly, this kind of came down to child-directed learning, where you want to have the child actually direct kind of the methods and the direction they're going, where it's actually about the direction they're going, and they're not just constantly being reactive to the teacher. This also incorporates cooperative learning and group projects. It's easier to teach people how to work together if you're doing this when they're younger and when they're in this, more transformative phase, whereas just teaching them how to work by themselves, and then when they, finally get older and they have to work in a group of people, it's going to be incredibly hard. On page 346, I really like this quote. It said, concept of development as a dynamic process rather than as static levels. If you know anything about the Montessori methods, it's basically this idea that, you go at your own pace and you're dynamically learning, and sometimes you're learning more, sometimes you're learning less, but you're doing what's right for you. And it's not about making everyone have to be at the same level all at the same time. So moving on. Assessment. So this is basically, in layman's terms, just how well are you doing? And the thing is that the old ways, and throughout this entire chapter, it's a big emphasis on the old way of things versus the new way of things in terms of how we saw this in terms of education. And the old way was mainly used to validate beliefs about minorities because they would use assessments that didn't incorporate cultural backgrounds or historical backgrounds. And what ended up happening was assessments were used to only for one type of people or one sort of direction. So the problem with this is that when you have assessments that are only purely based on one type of thing where some people develop faster and some people develop slower, it doesn't work because everyone develops at their own pace. And ultimately, at different ages, people should have different expectations. So what ends up happening is that if you have it where everyone at the same age has to be at the same level, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And what ends up happening is you get this, it's not, oh, you're developing at your own rate. It's you're not as smart as other people. You're not as good for your age. So the new method is kind of more of an authentic assessment. And what this means is that it's individualized where the assessment makes sense for you. And this is meant to not meant to close doors, but open them. And how it does this is through the mindset is that instead of it being something where you did an assessment and it either means you continue or you did bad, now it's, okay, we see that you're good at this and you're bad at that. This is where you need to improve. This is where your strengths are. This is where this is where you should focus your time and energy on. And what they did to get these better assessments is instead of tests and oral responses in class or an oral exam sort of thing, interviews and observations can be used. And the whole methodology of this is that you're talking to people, you're talking to the student, and you're figuring out, okay, what are they focused on? What's their backgrounds? What do they understand? What do they not understand? And then go from there, not something where everyone has to be the same cookie-cutter thing. And then the other idea with observations is that you can actually see what they're doing in real life. You're not just seeing what did they, scribble on a piece of paper. You're actually seeing how are they engaging with the real world. Moving on, sensitive periods and developmental crises, aka middle school for most people. Basically, there's this whole thing of nature versus nurture and philosophy. And one of the things people ask is, is there naturally more sensitive periods or is this a nurturing thing? And, is it just because of crises happening that make it a more sensitive period, or is there naturally sensitive periods in your life? And basically, the argument is that there's adolescent years, and these are more sensitive periods, and that's just the nature of it. You all go through it. There's a hormone change, and these constitute a significant cognitive change. And some of these developmental crises that really affect people, are family situations, moving to a new place, new school, new teacher, new club, and they can be positive and negative in terms of the sensitive period. For instance, you get a new coach, and that new coach really facilitates a newfound passion in a sport. Or you move to a new place, and that can be good or bad. You meet a new group of people, and they facilitate something new you didn't know. And the main point of this is that it comes down to your development of ego identity, which is a whole nother thing. And it involves 8 stages of psychosocial development. And really what it comes down to is there's conflicts with the self, and it's figuring out those conflicts, figuring out who you are versus the rest of the world, and basically figuring out how you want to deal with these developmental crises, who you are, what you don't like about yourself, what you do like about yourself. And what they really talk about this is that the idea is that developmentally age practices, you want to make it where in this period of time when you're teaching kids, it's about this quote here, matching instruction to the developmental level of learners requires, Howard Gardner reminds us, challenging students to demonstrate understanding by applying knowledge to new situations. So it's not about not embracing these situations, but it's about embracing this period of time and figuring out how to, as educators, basically cater to this period. This period is different. People are experiencing new things. And instead of just saying you need to, still teach the same way and study the same way and do things the same way, you should incorporate this into your education and incorporate this into your teaching methods. And they bring, they're talking about things such as, fostering open discussions about these things, fostering meeting that new teacher, meeting that new club, and having a sense where you're learning to deal with these things instead of ignoring them. On to the focused questions. How can culture and schooling affect students' development? Are there really stages in children's and adolescents' development? If so, are some of these stages critical? How do teachers determine what is developmentally appropriate for their students? How can teachers reconcile demands for educational performance standards and accountability with the goal of education for understanding? And basically, to summarize this whole thing, basically this really chapter is about understanding the concept of age in the classroom. I mean, people learn at different ages, they see different things, and while there's a whole psychological background that influences this, from the perspective of education, it's the idea that you're factoring in, at this point in their age, how did they see things differently? What are they starting to see differently about themselves? What are they starting to see differently from that age group? And ultimately, it's about incorporating that into your education and understanding that, everyone grows at their own pace. Everyone matures at their own pace. Unfortunately, some people never mature. You probably know that one uncle. I don't know. At least I do. And what ends up happening is that this changes how we learn, and this changes how we see things in the world. And as educators, it's about catering to these needs and ultimately seeing how we can incorporate age into making better educational decisions. Thank you. This has been Ryan Corner.